Welcome, psychology students. This unit, Unit 4, is about sensation and perception. And in it, we'll be discussing all of the senses and how they create a sense of reality for you. We'll heavily focus on vision and hearing, but we'll cover the other senses as well. As you guys probably already know, there are things out there that you can't see and things out there that you can't hear, which begs the question when we talk about reality, what is that really? So I'm going to read you a quick intro. It's from an article called Our Brain, the Trickster. It's from a podcast called The Hidden Brain that NPR runs about all things around the brain. The here and now, we say these words with perfect calm and composure as if they actually mean something. We think we know what they mean, and they serve a purpose in our lives. Come to think of it, even if we have more freedom with the here, as in we're free to move about in space and we can conceive, an object filling up with volume in space, we realize things are there. The now doesn't really exist. Our minds create a representation of the here and the now so that we can guide ourselves through life. What we call reality is the result of our brain's really complex integration of external stimuli, which in basic language is how your brain views what it sees, what it hears, what it tastes, what it touches, and what it smells. The out there is collected by our sensory organs, and they're brought into the brain for processing, and somehow all that gets integrated into some sort of sense of personal reality. The brain builds reality, and that shouldn't be news to anyone. All you have to do is mess with it, get drunk, drugged, don't sleep for a couple of nights, and your perception of reality is fundamentally altered, which then begs the question, how sure are we that our reality, which is defined as the state of being real, how real is that for any of us? Today we're going to cover Module 16. It's probably going to take more than 15 minutes. And away we go. So, until I started teaching this class, I didn't really know that this existed, but there is something called prosopagnosia, which is face blindness. And there are people out there in the world that suffer from this, and they cannot recognize faces. They can't distinguish the characteristics. Their perception in their brain is just off a little bit. And there's a lady in the psychology textbook that gets interviewed. She's actually an author and a psychologist herself, but she talks a little bit about it. So these are her words. In college, I went on a date to the spaghetti station. I returned from the bathroom, plunked myself down in the wrong booth facing the wrong man. I remained completely unaware that he wasn't my date, even as my date, who was a stranger to me, accosted wrong booth guy and then stormed out of the spaghetti station. I can't distinguish actors in movies, on television. I don't recognize myself in photos. I didn't even recognize my own stepson in a soccer photo, and I failed to determine which husband was mine at parties, in the mall, at the market. It happens to me all the time. Anyway, it's just an example of how our perception is controlled by our brain. Unlike sellers, most of us have a functioning area of the underside of our brain's right hemisphere that helps us recognize a familiar human face as soon as we detect it. In only 1/7 of a second, actually. The ability illustrates a broader principle that nature's sensory gifts enable each animal to obtain simple and essential information. Frogs, which feed on flying insects, have cells in their eyes that fire only in response to small, dark, moving objects. A frog could actually starve to death, knee-deep in flies, if the flies did not move. But let one zoom by and the frog's bug detector cells snap awake. Male silkworms, moths' odor receptors can detect 1/billionth of an ounce of a sex attractant per second released by a female 1 mile away. That is why silkworms continue to be. And human ears are most sensitive to sound frequencies that include human voices, especially a baby's cry. I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but some mothers and fathers, I suppose, but some mothers, there'll be all kinds of noise going on at night. They won't hear anything, but if the baby cries, their brain alerts them to that. So the theme of this unit will just be how our perception is connected to our senses and how each of us sense things in a different way. So what type of person are you? Do you tend to look at the world in a mostly positive way, or do you tend to be more cynical and look at the glass as half empty? Stop and think about that for just a second. Okay, that question was just meant to be getting you to think about how the way that we perceive the world can be different from one person to the next. Okay, so what are sensations and perceptions? Let's define those first of all. So sensation is the process by which our sensory receptors and nervous system that we talked about in the last unit receive and represent stimulus energies from our environment. So when we were talking about the lady with the face recognition problem, for example, her face blindness illustrates the distinction between sensation and perception. When she looked at a friend, her sensation was normal. Her senses detect the same information that anybody else's would, and they transmit that information to her brain. Perception, the process of organizing and interpreting sensory information, which enables us to recognize meaningful objects and events, is where she runs into trouble. Her perception, the process by which her brain organizes and interprets sensory input, is almost normal. Thus, she might recognize people from their hair, gait, voice, or particular physique, but not their face. Her experience is much like the struggle you and I would have trying to recognize a specific penguin in a group of waddling penguins. In our everyday experiences, sensation and perception blend together in one continuous process. In this module, we're going to slow that process down into parts, but in real life, of course, they work together to help us decipher everything in the world around us. When you're done with this unit, I want you to go and look at the link on both the class webpage and on Google Classroom, well, either or, and try the Stroop experiment. Then we'll talk results after that. Okay, what do you see? So instead of me wasting time with the recording, when I say what do you see in this unit, as we're like exploring images like this, push pause and give yourself that think time, and then I'm immediately from now on going to go into kind of an explanation. So some people see two ladies sitting at, or a lady sitting and looking at herself in a mirror with all of her kind of things arranged on a counter in front of her, and other people see a skull. What do you see here? Some people see like an Eskimo knocking on kind of a door, and other people see a lady or a person, I guess, with a face kind of sloped face. So there are two things at work here. Bottom-up processing starts at the sensory receptors and works its way up to our actual brain processing what we see. So bottom-up processing would be being aware of the image in front of you and how that sense is being perceived to your brain, which is really difficult for us to do. Probably more often we're using top-down processing, which is looking at the big picture, kind of getting an overview, and then sinking in to try to look at detail, because we obviously know that this image must have something interesting to it, otherwise I wouldn't be showing it to you. So some people immediately just see the rose that's there, and other people see the couple in the middle that are kissing right off the bat. So that is your brain doing both bottom-up and top-down processing. Let's get quick definitions. Bottom-up processing is analyzing that begins with the sensory receptors and works its way up to the brain's integration of sensory information. So it's pretty much what's happening in your brain that's going on unspoken. And top-down is information processing guided by the higher level mental processes when we construct perception, drawing on our experience and our expectations. So depending upon your background, some of the images that we look at, and there are multiple things to see, your background helps you to see something in a particular way more quickly. Selective attention. So how much information do we actually consciously attend to at once? Through selective attention, your awareness focuses like a flashlight beam on a minute aspect of all the things that you're experiencing in a given moment. By one estimate, your 5 senses take in 11 million bits of information per second, of which you consciously process about 40. Yet your mind's unconscious track intuitively makes great use of the other. Oh my goodness, my husband's got to be doing this. Until reading this sentence, for example, you were probably pretty unaware that your shoes were pressing against your feet, or that your nose is kind of in your line of vision. But if you start paying attention to those sorts of things that are in your peripheral vision, or that are just part of the things you've been blocking out, you can become aware of them again. A classic example of selective attention is the cocktail party effect, your ability to attend to only one voice among many, while also being able to detect your own name in an unattended voice. So for example, if you're at a party and you're talking to a friend, you're kind of tuning out everybody around you. But if you hear your name across the room, all of a sudden your ears pick up and you're thinking, what's going on over there? This effect might have prevented an embarrassing and dangerous situation in 2009 when 2 commercial airline pilots lost track of time. They were focused on their laptops and conversation. They ignored alarmed air traffic controllers' attempts to reach them as they overflew their Minneapolis destination by 150 miles. If only the controllers had known and spoken the pilots' names, they might have been kind of perked back to life. Text or talk on the phone while driving, or attend to music or GPS device, and selective attention will shift back and forth between the road and the electronic devices for your attention. You'll probably also blink less. When focused on a task such as reading, people blink less than when their mind is wandering. If you want to know whether your dinner companion is actually focused on what you're saying, watch for eye blinks and hope there aren't too many. We pay a toll for switching attentional gears, especially when we shift to complex tasks like noticing and avoiding cars around us. The toll is a slight and sometimes fatal delay in coping. About 28% of all traffic accidents occur when people are chatting on cell phones or texting. One study tracked long-haul truck drivers for 18 months. The video cameras mounted in their cabs showed that they were 23 times greater at risk of a collision if they were texting. Mindful of such things, the United States in 2010 banned truckers and bus drivers from texting while driving. It's not just truck drivers who are at risk. 1 in 4 teen drivers with cell phones admit to texting while driving. Multitasking comes at a cost. MRI scans offer a biological account of how multitasking distracts from brain resources allocated to driving. They show that brain activity in areas vital to driving decreases an average of 37% when a driver is attending to even a conversation. Even hands-free cell phone device talking is more distracting than a conversation with a passenger who can see the driving demands and pause the conversation. When University of Sydney researchers analyzed phone records for the moments before car crashes, they found that cell phone users were 4 times more at risk.